Chapter 5. The Affair at Griboyedov's. The old, two-story cream-colored mansion was situated in a boulevard circle. It was set deep within a run-down garden, divided from the sidewalk by a wrought iron fence. The small court before the building was paved with asphalt. In winter-time, a pile of snow rose from it, surmounted by a shovel. In summer, it turned into a most magnificent outdoor section of the restaurant under a canvas awning. The building was called Griboyedov House, since it was said to have belonged at one time to an aunt of the writer Alexander Sergeyevich Griboyedov. Whether it did or did not belong to her, we do not know. But if we remember rightly, it seems to us that Griboyedov had never had any such home-owning aunt. Nevertheless, this was what the building was called. In fact, a certain Moscow liar used to say that the famous writer read scenes from his Woe from Wit to this very aunt, who listened reclining on a sofa in the round hall with the columns on the second floor. But what the devil, who knows? Perhaps he did read to her. That's not the point. Anyway, the point is that currently the house belonged to that same Massolit, which had been headed until his appearance at the Patriarch Pond by the unfortunate Mikhail Alexandrovich Berlioz. The members of Massolit never troubled to use the full name Griboyedov House. They simply called it Griboyedov's. I spent 2 hours at Griboyedov's yesterday. How did it go? Got myself a month in Yalta. Good work. Or else, go and see Berlioz. He's receiving today from 4 to 6 at Griboyedov's. And so on. Massolit made itself at home in Griboyedov's in the coziest and most comfortable way imaginable. The visitor of Griboyedov's was greeted first of all by the announcements of a variety of sports clubs and by the collective as well as individual photographs of members of Massolit, which photographs covered the walls of the staircase leading to the upper floor. On the door of the very first room upstairs there was a large sign, Fishing and Vacation Section, which displayed a carp caught on a line. On the door of room number 2, there was a somewhat obscure inscription, One-Day Creative Trips, CMV Podlozhная. The next door bore a short but altogether cryptic sign, Перелегено. Next, the chance visitor at Griboyedov's was all but dizzied by the multitude of signs peppering the aunt's heavy walnut doors. Register for paper with Porklevkina. Pay office. Sketch writer's personal accounts. Cutting across the longest queue, which stretched all the way down to the foyer, one could see the sign, House in Question, on a door that was constantly being assailed by a crowd of people. Beyond the house in question, a magnificent poster opened to view. A cliff, and riding on its crest, a horseman in a felt cloak with a rifle behind his back. A little lower were some palms with a balcony, and sitting on the balcony, a young man with a tidy tuft of hair over his forehead and a fountain pen in his hand, staring off somewhere into the heights with overconfident, overbold eyes. The legend read, Full-scale creative vacations from 2 weeks, short story, to 1 year, novel trilogy. Yalta, Suksu, Paravoya, Zikhiziri, Mahindrauri, Leningrad, Winter Palace. At this door, there was also a line, but not an excessive one, about 100 persons in all. Next, obedient to the fanciful twists and turns, ascent and descents of the Griboyedov building, followed the Massolit Executive Board, Chairman of Massolit, Billiard Room, a variety of auxiliary institutions, and finally, the hall with columns, where the aunt had delighted in the comedy of her illustrious nephew. Any visitor at Griboyedov's, unless, of course, he was a hopeless dunce, immediately realized how well those lucky chosen ones, the members of Massolit, were living, and was attacked at once by the blackest envy, and began at once to send up bitter reproaches to heaven because it had not endowed him at birth with literary talent, without which one naturally could not even dream of coming into possession of a Massolit membership card, brown, smelling of good leather, with a wide gilt edge, a card well known throughout Moscow. Who will say anything in defense of envy? It is a nasty emotion. Nevertheless, one should consider the visitor's position too, for what he had seen upstairs was not yet all. It was in fact quite from all. The entire Lower floor of the aunt's house was occupied by a restaurant, and what a restaurant! It was justly considered to be best in Moscow. And not only because it was housed in two large rooms with vaulted ceilings, adorned by lilac horses with Assyrian manes, not only because on every table there was a lamp with a silk shawl draped around the shade, not only because it was impossible for the man on the street to gain admission to it, but also because, in the quality of its fare, Griboyedov's beat any restaurant in Moscow, and because this fare was served at the most moderate, most reasonable prices. Hence, there was nothing surprising in a conversation such as the following, which the author of these absolutely authentic lines once heard near the wrought iron fence of Griboyedov's. "Where are you dining tonight, Amvrosy?" What a question! Here, of course, my dear Foka. Archibald Archibaldovich dropped me a hint today that they'll be serving perch au naturel, cooked to order, a virtuoso dish. "Ah, you know how to live, Amvrosy," sighed the lean, shabby Foka, with a carbuncle on his neck, to the red-lipped giant, the golden-haired, ruddy-cheeked poet Amvrosy. "It takes no special skill," protested Amvrosy, "just an ordinary desire to live like a human being. You're trying to tell me, Foka, that perch can be had at the Coliseum as well? But the Coliseum, a portion of the perch costs 13 rubles and 15 kopecks, and here it is 5.50. Besides, at the Coliseum, the perch is 3 days old, and moreover, at the Coliseum, there is no guarantee that you won't get a bunch of grapes slapped in your face by some young hoodlum breaking in from theater drive. No, I categorically oppose the Coliseum." The gourmet, Amvrosy, thundered across the entire boulevard. "Don't try to persuade me, Foka." "I'm not trying to persuade you, Amvrosy," squeaked Foka. "A man can dine at home, too." "Thanks a million," boomed Amvrosy. "I can imagine your wife trying to cook perch au naturel in a saucepan in the communal kitchen at home. Ha, 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 ha. Au revoir, Foka." And humming gaily, Amvrosy hurried off to the veranda under the awning. Ah, yes. There was a time, there was indeed. The old Moscow residents remember the famous Griboyedovs. You speak of perch cooked to order, a cheap trifle, my dear Amvrosy. What of the sterlet in a silver dish, served sliced and interlarded with lobster tails and fresh roe, and eggs cocotte with puree of mushrooms and individual ramekins? And what about the fillet of thrushes? Was that bad? With truffles? And the quail Genoese? 9.50. And the jazz, and the service, and in July, when the family was away in the country, and you were detained in the city by urgent literary business, the plate of soup printanière glowing in the golden sunspot on the immaculate tablecloth on the veranda in the shade of the climbing vine? Do you remember, Amvrosy? But why ask? I see by your lips that you do. Talk of whitefish, perch, and what about the partridge, the snipe, the woodcocks in season, the quail, the sparkling narzan? But enough, you're digressing. You are digressing, reader. Follow me. At 10:30 in the evening, on the day when Berlioz perished at the Patriarch's Ponds, there were lights in only one room upstairs at Griboyedov's, where 12 writers, assembled for a meeting, languished in expectation of Mikhail Alexandrovich. They sat on chairs, on tables, and even on the 2 window sills in the office of the Massolit executive board, suffering extremely from lack of air. Not a breath of freshness came through the open windows. Moscow was exuding the heat accumulated all day long in the asphalt, and it was obvious that the night would bring no relief. The smell of onions rose from the cellar of the aunt's house, where the restaurant kitchen was at work, and everybody was thirsty. Everybody was nervous and irritated. The novelist Beskudnikov, a quiet, neatly dressed man with attentive yet elusive eyes, took out his watch. The hand crept toward 11. Beskudnikov tapped his finger on the face of the watch and showed it to his neighbor, the poet Dvubratsky, who sat on a table, miserably swinging his feet in yellow rubber-soled shoes. "Well," muttered Dvubratsky. "The fellow must have gotten stuck on the Klyazma," responded the low contralto of Nastasya Lukinishna Nepremenova, an orphaned lady of Moscow merchant origin who had become a writer specializing in stories of sea battles, under the pen name of Pilot George. If I may say so, boldly spoke up the author of popular sketches, Zagrivov, I would much rather be sipping tea on a balcony myself now, instead of broiling here. After all, the meeting was called for 10. It must be beautiful on the Klazma, Pilot George egged on her colleagues, knowing that the vacation village of Pereligina on the Klazma River was everybody's sore spot. The nightingales must be singing already. Somehow I always work better in the country, especially in spring. For the 3rd year now, I've paid in my good money to send my wife with her goittier to this paradise, but there is not a sail in sight, the short story writer Iranim Paprikhin said acridly. Some people are lucky, the critic Ababkov boomed from the window sill. Gleeful lights flickered in the little eyes of Pilot George, and she said, softening her contralto, we must not be envious, comrades. There are only 22 houses in the village, and only 7 more are being built, and there are 3,000 of us in Massolit. 3,111, someone put in from the corner. You see, continued Pilot, what can be done? It's only natural that the most talented among us were given summer homes there. The generals, Glukharev, the scenario writer, broke into the chorus of complaints. Beskudnikov pretended to yawn and walked out of the room. All by himself, in 5 rooms, in Pereligina, Glukharev said after him. Lavrovich has 6 to himself, cried Deniskin, and his dining room is paneled in oak. Ah, that's not the point now, boomed Ababkov. The point is that it's 11:30. The room became noisy. Everyone was on the verge of rebellion. They tried to telephone the hated Pereligina and got the wrong number. Instead of Berlioz, they were given Lavrovich and told that Lavrovich was out on the river. They lost their tempers altogether. They tried to call the Commission on Fine Literature at number 930 and naturally found no one there. He could have called, cried Deniskin, Glukharev, and Kvant. Ah, but they cried unjustly. Mikhail Alexandrovich could not have called anywhere. Far, far from Griboyedov's, in a huge hall, illuminated with 1,000-watt lights, what had so recently been Mikhail Alexandrovich lay on 3 zinc tables. On the first lay the naked body with the broken arm and crushed chest, caked with blood. On the other, the head, with the front teeth knocked out, with dim, open eyes untroubled by the sharpest lights. On a third, a heap of blood-stiffened rags. Near the beheaded body stood a professor of forensic medicine, a pathological anatomist, and his dissector, representatives of the inquest office, and the writer Zheldybin, deputy chairman of Massolit, who had been summoned by a telephone call. A car had called for Zheldybin and took him first, together with the inquest officials, this was about midnight, to the dead man's apartment, where all his papers were sealed up. After that, they went to the morgue. And now the group around the body conferred on what was best, to sew the severed head back to the neck, or bring the body, as it was, to Griboyedov's hall, simply covering to the chin with a black shawl? No, Mikhail Alexandrovich could not have telephoned anywhere. And the indignant exclamations of Deniskin, Glukharev, Kvant, and Beskudnikov were quite unjust. Exactly at midnight, all 12 writers left the upper floor and descended to the restaurant. Here, each one again thought unkindly to himself of Mikhail Alexandrovich, for naturally all the tables on the veranda were occupied, and they had no choice left but to dine in the beautiful but airless rooms. And exactly at midnight, something crashed, rang, scattered, and jumped in the first room. And all at once, a man's high voice shrieked desperate to the music, "Hallelujah!" Those were the opening notes of the famous Griboyedov jazz band. The faces of the diners, covered with perspiration, lit up. The painted horses on the ceiling seemed to come to life. The lights appeared to have brightened, and suddenly both rooms broke into dance, and with them the veranda. Glukharev danced with the poetess Tamara Polomysyats. Kvant danced. Zhukopov, the novelist, danced with some movie actress in a yellow dress. Everyone danced. Dragunsky, Cherdachi, the short Deniskin with the giant Pilot George, The beautiful architect Simikan Gal in a tight clutch of a stranger in white homespun trousers, members and invited guests, Muscovites and visitors from out of town, the writer Johann from Kronstadt, a certain Vitya Kuftik from Rostov with a purple patch over his whole chest. I believe he was a movie director. The most eminent representatives of the Massolit poetry section, Pavianov, Bogahuysky, Slatky, Shpichkin, Yadelfina Buzdiak, young men of unknown professions with crew cuts and paddled shoulders, a very elderly man with a beard to which a bit of scallion still clung, his arms around a stickly girl devoured by anemia in a crumpled orange silk dress. Dripping with perspiration, the waiters carried sweating beer mugs high over their heads, shouting hoarsely and with hatred, "Sorry, citizen!" Somewhere in a loudspeaker a voice commanded, "Karsky shashlik 1, Zubrovka 2, try polonaise." The thin, high voice no longer sang but howled, "Hallelujah!" The clashing of the golden cymbals occasionally covered even the clatter of the dishes, which the dishwashers were sending down the chute into the kitchen. In short, hell. And at midnight there was a vision in hell. A dazzlingly handsome, black-eyed man with a dagger-shaped beard in a frock coat came out on the veranda and cast a royal eye around his domain. It was said by the mystics that there had been a time when the handsome man did not wear a frock coat, but a wide leather belt with revolvers tucked into it, and his raven hair was tied with scarlet silk, and he commanded a brig that sailed the Caribbean under a dead black flag bearing the sign of the skull. But no, the seductive mystics are lying. There are no Caribbean seas in the world, no reckless buccaneers are sailing them, and no corvettes are chasing them. No cannon smoke drifts low over the waves. There is nothing, and there never was. There is only a stunted linden tree out there, an iron fence, and the boulevard beyond it. And ice melting in the bowl, and someone's bovine bloodshot eyes at the next table, and fear, fear. Oh gods, gods, poison, give me poison. And suddenly the name Berlioz fluttered up over the table. Suddenly the jazz collapsed as though someone had crushed it with a fist. What? 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 Berlioz! And everyone jumped up, everyone cried out. Yes, a wave of grief rose at the terrible news about Mikhail Alexandrovich. Somebody ran and shouted that they must all at once, without leaving the spot, compose a collective telegram and send it off immediately. But what telegram, we ask you, and where? And what would be the purpose in sending it? And indeed, where? And what need of telegrams has he whose crumpled skull is now being squeezed together in the rubber gloves of the dissector, whose neck the professor is now piercing with curved needles? He is dead, and no longer has any need of telegrams. Everything is finished. Let us not trouble the telegraph office any more. Yes, he is dead, but we are alive. Yes, a wave of grief had swept up, but it lasted a while and began to subside, and here and there someone had already gone back to his stable, and stealthily at first, then openly, taken a sip from his glass, then a chaser. And really, who can allow cutlets de volaille to go to waste? Can we help Mikhail Alexandrovich? How? By going hungry? After all, we are alive. Naturally, the piano was locked up. The jazz band went home. Several journalists hurried off to their newspapers to write obituaries. It was learned that Zheldybin had arrived from the morgue. He installed himself in the dead man's office upstairs, and there was an instant rumor that he would take over the duties of Berlioz. Zheldybin summoned all 12 members of the executive board from the restaurant, and a meeting was immediately opened in Berlioz's office to discuss the urgent questions regarding the decor of the column Griboyedov Hall, the transfer of the body from the morgue to this hall, its placement on public view, and all the rest of the matters connected with the said event. And the restaurant resumed its customary life, and would have gone on peacefully until closing time at 4 o'clock in the morning, had it not been for an utterly unprecedented occurrence which struck the guests far more than the news of Berlioz's death. First, to react were the coachmen waiting at the gates of Griboyedov's house. One of them, rising on his box, was heard to exclaim, "Whoa, look at that!" After that, a little light flared up from out of nowhere near the wrought iron fence and floated toward the veranda. The diners began to rise in their seats to peer at it and noticed that a white ghost was moving toward the restaurant together with the light. When it approached the trellis, they sat petrified at the tables with pieces of sterlet in their forks and goggled at it. The doorman, who had just stepped out of the restaurant coat room into the yard to have a smoke, crushed the cigarette with his foot and started out toward the ghost with the patent aim of barring its access to the restaurant. For some reason, however, he did not carry out his intention and stopped with a vacuous smile. And the ghost, entering the opening in the trellis, stopped unhindered on the veranda. At this point, everybody realized that it was not a ghost at all, but Ivan Nikolaevich Homeless, the famous poet. He was barefoot, in a tattered whitish Tolstoy blouse, with a paper icon depicting an unknown saint pinned to his chest with a diaper pin, and in striped white underpants. In his hand, Ivan Nikolaevich carried a burning wedding candle. His right cheek had a fresh scratch. It would be difficult to measure the depth of the silence that fell over the veranda. One of the waiters let a beer mug hang slanting from his hand, and the beer dripped on the floor. The poet raised the candle overhead and loudly pronounced, "Hail, friends!" After that he glanced under the nearest table and exclaimed despairingly, "No, he is not here." Two voices were heard. A basso said with pitiless finality, "He is done for. Delirium tremens." A second frightened female voice said, "But how did the militia allow him in a street in this condition?" Ivan Nikolaevich heard this and answered, "They tried to stop me twice, on Skaterny and here on Bronne, but I swung over a fence, and as you see, I got my cheek scratched." Then Ivan Nikolaevich raised his candle again and cried, "Brethren in literature!" His hoarse voice became stronger and more fervent. "Hear me one and all. He has appeared. Catch him at once, or he will work untold disasters." "What? What do you say? Who has appeared?" voices cried from all sides. "The consultant," answered Ivan. "And this consultant has just murdered Misha Berlioz at the Patriarch's Pond." Now people rushed from the inner room to the veranda, and a crowd converged around Ivan's light. "Excuse me, but tell us more precisely," a quiet and courteous voice spoke into Ivan's ear. "Tell us, how did he murder him? Who murdered him?" "The foreign consultant, a professor and a spy," Ivan Nikolaevich answered, looking around. "And what is his name?" the voice whispered. "That's just the trouble. The name!" Ivan cried in anguish. "If I only knew the name! I didn't see it clearly on his calling card. I remember only the first letter, W. The name began with W. But what name begins with W?" Ivan asked himself, clutching his forehead, and began to mutter, "W, W, we, wa, wo, Warshner, Wagner, Weiner, Wagner, Winter." The hair on Ivan's head began to stir with his effort to remember. "Wolf?" a woman cried sympathetically. Ivan turned angrily. "Idiot!" he shouted, searching for the woman with his eyes. "What has Wolf has to do with it? Wolf is not to blame. No, I can't remember." "Well, now, citizen, the thing to do is to telephone at once to the militia. Let them send out 5 motorcycles with machine guns to hunt down the professor. And don't forget to tell them that he has 2 others with him, a stringy fellow, checkered with a cracked pince-nez, and a tomcat, black, fat, and I will look around Griboyedov's. I have a feeling he's here." Ivan fell into a state of anxiety, pushed his way out of the crowd, and began to swing the candle, spattering himself with wax, and to look under the tables. Someone's voice said, "A doctor!" and someone's ingratiating, flashy face, plump and shaven, in horn-rimmed glasses, appeared before Ivan. "Comrade Homeless," the face began in an oily voice, "calm down. You are shaken by the death of our beloved Mikhail Alexandrovich. No, of Misha Berlioz. We all understand it very well. You need rest. The comrades will help you. Get to bed now, and you will take a nap." "You," Ivan bared his teeth at him, "don't you understand that the professor must be caught? And here you bother me with your nonsense, cretin!" "Comrade Homeless, pardon me," the face replied, flushing, backing away, and already regretting that it had let itself be drawn into the affair. "Oh no, anyone else, but not you. You I will not pardon," Ivan Nikolaevich said with quiet hatred. A spasm twisted his face. He quickly shifted the candle from the right hand to the left, swung widely, and landed the sympathetic face a blow on the ear. At this point, the others betold themselves to rush at Ivan, and they rushed. The candle went out, and the glasses which had been knocked off the helpful face were instantly trampled. Ivan let out a curdling battle cry, heard temptingly even on the boulevard, and began to defend himself. Dishes flew clattering to the floor. Women screamed. While the waiters were tying up the poet with towels, a conversation went on in the courtroom between the commander of the brig and the doorman. Did you see that he was in his underpants? The pirate asked coldly. But Archibald Archibaldovich, the doorman answered cowed, how could I keep him out if he's a member of Massolit? Did you see that he was in his underpants? The pirate repeated. But please, Archibald Archibaldovich, the doorman said, turning purple, what could I do? I understand myself that there are ladies on the veranda. Ladies have nothing to do with it. Ladies do not care, the pirate answered, literally incinerating the doorman with his eyes. But the militia does care. A man in underwear can walk through the streets of Moscow only if he is accompanied by the militia, and if he is on his way to one place only, the nearest militia precinct. And you, if you're a doorman, ought to know that the moment you catch sight of such a man, you must begin to whistle. Do you hear? Do you hear what is happening on the veranda? The half-crazed doorman heard a peculiar booming and grunting from the veranda, the sound of breaking dishes, women's screams. Well, what shall I do to you for this? Asked the buccaneer. The doorman's face assumed the hue of a typhoid patient, and his eyes stared with horror. It seemed to him that the black hair, neatly combed and parted, was suddenly covered with flaming silk. The dress shirt and the frock coat vanished, and the handle of a gun appeared behind a leather belt. The doorman imagined himself hanging from the fort topgallant. With his own eyes, he saw his own protruding tongue and lifeless head lolling on his shoulder. He even heard the splashing of the waves against the ship. The doorman's knees buckled. But here the buccaneer took pity on him and extinguished his burning stare. Take care, Nikolai. This is the last time. We don't need such doormen at the restaurant, even for nothing. Get yourself a job as watchman in a church. Having pronounced these words, the commander issued a command clear, sharp, and quick. Get Panteley from the buffet, get a militiaman, a report, a car, to the psychiatric ward, and he added, whistle. 15 minutes later, the astounded public, not only in the restaurant, but on the boulevard itself, and in the windows of the buildings facing the restaurant garden, saw Panteley, the doorman, a militiaman, a waiter, and the poet Ryukin carrying out through the Griboyedov's guests a young man swaddled like a doll, streaming with tears, spitting, aiming particularly at Ryukin, and screaming over the whole boulevard, swine, swine! A furious-faced truck driver was starting up his motor. Next to him, a coachman with his horse's flanks with violet reins, shouting, why not get a racer? I have taken others to the psychiatric ward. The crowd hummed around them, discussing the unprecedented occurrence. In short, there was a low, vile, enticing, ugly scandal, which ended only when the truck rolled away from the Griboyedov gates with the unfortunate Ivan Nikolaevich, the militiaman, Panteley, and Ryukin.